just your casual Monday night blockbuster, or unless you're from Vancouver, then it's Monday afternoon. We all saw this tweet at the same time. Here's how it begins. Vancouver Canucks general manager Patrick Allvin. Let me stop you right there. Every single Canucks tweet starts that way. It'll be like Vancouver Canucks general manager Patrick Allvin, and you're like, I'm into it. What are you about to announce? And then it's like Vancouver Canucks general manager Patrick Allvin has announced Nils Hoglander has been loaned to the minors. And it's like, you could have just said he's going to the minors. You didn't have to start with all that and get me all excited like everybody else. Anyway, here's the tweet. Vancouver Canucks general manager Patrick Allvin announced today that the team has acquired forward Anthony Beauvillier, center Aatu Raty, and a protected 2023 first-round draft pick from the New York Islanders in exchange for center Bo Horvat. Whoa! It's funny. I was actually talking about the Canucks and the Islanders recently, but I wasn't talking about them because I thought the Islanders were going to go out and get Bo Horvat necessarily. I was saying it because of some of the criticism that Lou Lamoriello has taken, and he wasn't really able to have much of an offseason or bring anybody to the Islanders, but there was a rumored move in the works where supposedly the Islanders were in on JT Miller until very abruptly it stopped. And this is what I say about blockbusters that don't happen. You don't just go from wanting and needing a player like JT Miller to just, you know what, we'll just make do. I mean, sometimes that happens. Sometimes you just swing and you miss. But at the trade deadline, you need a forward, you need a winger, you need a guy who plays left wing. Here's the top left winger, and you go out and you try to get him, and if you don't get him, you try to get the guy who's second, and if you don't get him, third, and so on, and then at some point you just decide it's not worth it. The Islanders more and more and more as this season has gone on have shown that they need help up front, and specifically they need help scoring. And they go out and get arguably the biggest fish of them all, definitely the biggest center available in Bo Horvat. Guy who has 31 goals in 49 games on a team that hasn't exactly been great this year. We were talking about Bo Horvat in the 60-goal conversation, and while that appears to be sailing away, 50's definitely within grasp, and he still could hit 60, you never know. That would involve the Islanders kind of changing how they play, which I think is a huge reason for why Horvat got brought on board. So the reasons for criticism for this deal are fairly obvious. The Islanders are not in a playoff spot right now, but let's talk about this in a vacuum, just from a value standpoint. Number one, this is a victory for the Canucks organization in that it was a complete surprise and no one saw it coming. This is a team that has been an incredibly leaky ship in very recent memory and for a long time. But internally, one of the things they're talking about with this trade is, hey, no one heard. Now let's talk about what they got, though. They got a young player in Anthony Beauvillier. He's only 25 years old, $4.15 million against the cap this season and next before he becomes an unrestricted free agent. Then you have Aatu Raty from the New York Islanders, a second-round pick from a couple years ago. He's 20 years old. And a 2023 first-round pick. Now, everybody wants those 2023 first-round picks, but this one is top 12 protected. So let's say the Islanders season goes off the rails, they don't make the playoffs, and maybe they even win the draft lottery. That means they gave the Canucks Connor Bedard! No, it doesn't mean that. It means the Islanders, because of that protection, get to keep that pick, would get to keep Connor Bedard, but then the Canucks would get the 2024 first-round pick from the Islanders, and that pick would be unprotected. So the Islanders, there's incentive to not just do well this season, but do well going forward. Now for Beauvillier, some of the numbers out there are not that great. Evolving Hockey posted a chart, and yeah, he's got a little bit of offense to him. Not the greatest defensive player. And for that reason, I feel like Beauvillier is going to really benefit from this trade. I just don't know if he was that great of a match for the New York Islanders. This is a player who has done pretty well for himself. That $4+ million contract didn't fall out of mid-air. He's produced at a decent clip in the past and at a young age and gone to the Final Four twice with the New York Islanders, once in the bubble and once the year after. The Islanders were probably the second best team in hockey for a couple years. They just kept running into the Lightning in the third round of the playoffs, and Beauvillier was no small part of those teams. before he turned 25. I'm seeing way too much written about Beauvillier today that completely writes him off. If anything, I think he cashes in the most out of this deal with Vancouver. What if he goes to the Canucks and he has a good end to this season and he produces at a decent clip, and then next year he puts up potential 60, 70 points. He ends up in a Kuzmenko situation where he finds chemistry with a guy and they just click and they just start rattling off points. Then he goes to unrestricted free agency and the Canucks can choose to keep him, or he goes to UFA and he makes even more money because teams know what he can do. When he hits unrestricted free agency, he'll only be 27 years old and he'll still have more playoff experience than a big chunk of guys his age and older. Meanwhile, for the New York Islanders, there's talk about Bo Horvat and bringing him in this season, but also how do you afford to keep him next season? We'll get to that bit a little bit later, but if a player is not working with your team and they make $4.15 million this year and next, it's no small part of this deal that the Islanders were able to get out from under over $4 million of cap that they didn't want. You're kind of talking out of both sides of your mouth. You're saying this player is good, but then the Islanders are well shot of him. It's not necessarily black and white. It wouldn't be the first time we saw a player go from one system to another and have a lot of success. But in terms of freeing up cap space, consider that guys like Oliver Bjorkstrand and Max Pacioretty were available this offseason for nothing. Marc-Andre Fleury went from the Vegas Golden Knights to the Chicago Blackhawks for a guy you can't name, and neither can I. I don't remember his name. I know he's Finnish. That's about it. The first round pick is almost not worth talking about because it's magic beans. We don't even know if the Canucks are going to get that pick this year. But consider this. In theory, and this is just in theory, but the Islanders could miss the playoffs this year. They end up giving the Canucks, let's say, the 14th overall pick in this draft, and the Canucks win the draft lottery. Everyone's been talking rebuild in Vancouver. Imagine you get Connor Bedard on the Vancouver Canucks with your first overall pick, and you get to add the 14th overall pick, whoever you pick there, to it. The possibilities are endless. You could get a key player who plays with Bedard for like his entire career. You could get a second line guy. You can get a key defenseman who you probably need to bolster that D-core. Or, here's a fun one if you're Patrick Allvin, you could trade it. No shortage of teams are going to want that pick on draft day. So the 2023 first is easily the most fun for your imagination, but we don't know if it's actually going to be this year or next. It could, in theory, be the first overall pick in 2024. Wouldn't that be something? But we're a ways away from finding that out. Then there's Raty, a 20-year-old, big cost control. He's on the first year of his ELC, and then there's next year and the year after that, and then you start talking what he's going to be going forward. Well, what is he now? Well, he's got 12 NHL games to his name this season with the New York Islanders, and he's got 2 goals in those games. He's played most of his season, though, in the American Hockey League in the minors with the Bridgeport Sound Tigers, and in 27 games, he has 7 goals, 8 assists for 15 points. That's really not a bad clip, over half a point a game for a 20-year-old in the AHL. And you might remember him from torching the World Juniors last year with Finland. He had 10 points in 7 games. He's 6'2", 185 pounds. It's likely that he'll fill out that frame, and we know hockey men like... There's a couple of things I could see you grumbling about if you were a Canucks fan. Number one, not waiting until the trade deadline to see if you could get even more. Like, teams get desperate around the trade deadline, but you're also kind of desperate because you need those assets because your team's not very good. But the really strange thing is the Canucks ended up retaining 25% of Horvat's salary. My question is, why 25%? Why not half and see if you can get more? And also, why not include a conditional pick in there where it can be a conditional 6th or 7th or whatever, but it goes up to a 3rd, a 2nd, even another 1st if the Islanders are able to re-sign Horvat. It's customary. Like, it's not uncommon to see a deal with a pending UFA that has some sort of condition on a pick where if the team retains them, you get a big old bunch of stuff. Think Oilers and Ducks. When the Oilers gave the Ducks Chris Pronger, there was a conditional pick. If they made it to the Stanley Cup final, they did end up making it to the Stanley Cup final. The Ducks won the Stanley Cup, so they weren't too upset about giving up the first round pick that ended up giving the Oilers Jordan Eberle. And that might seem like a lot, but it's not for a cup now, is it? Now, this is my favorite wrinkle. The Islanders are not in a playoff spot right now. They're close, but there are a bunch of teams who are close in the Eastern Conference. You got the Washington Capitals, the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Buffalo Sabres, the Florida Panthers, and the Isles, who have been one of the coldest teams in the NHL before winning back-to-back games. One of my favorite accounts, Tic Tac Tomar, asked this question, and I love it. Imagine the Islanders can't get into a playoff spot, flip Bo Horvat, and get a better return. So what's interesting about that is it is entirely possible. Let's say the Islanders continue to be cold, or at very least, come trade deadline, they're not ahead of Washington or Pittsburgh or Buffalo or Florida. They're right where they are, and that's a bad place. Even if you're within 2-3 points, you're leaving way too much to chance. Could the Islanders, in theory, flip Horvat for more? It's possible, because the Canucks already retain 25% on this player. If the Islanders agree to retain 50% of what's left of Horvat's deal, the acquiring team gets him for like free? Like I'm not a math guy, but because the Canucks retained on Horvat, and in theory the Islanders could retain on Horvat again an even larger sum of money or sum of cap space, the number of teams who could trade for Horvat has increased in a way. But the big issue there, what about that 2023 protected first that could become a 2024 unprotected first? So let's say the Islanders completely screw it and they end up having to trade Horvat. Are you going to be able to sign Horvat as a free agent? Are you going to be able to compete next year? If you're not able to go out and get Horvat, who are you going to be able to convince to join your team to be any good? Because you have every reason in the world to be as good as possible because you don't have a first round pick. Listen, I don't think it's very likely at all that that happens, but it is possible. I think the most likely scenario, even though the Islanders have not engaged Bo Horvat in talks yet at the time I'm shooting this, I think that's the sort of thing that can change very quickly. I think the Islanders likely had a number that they were thinking for JT Miller this summer, and I think they're willing to at least start the conversation somewhere around there for Horvat. I think the Islanders got Bo Horvat because they intend on signing Bo Horvat long term. And speaking of Bo Horvat, what is with Lou Lamoriello and Blockbuster surrounding Bo Horvat? From Cap Friendly, at the 2013 draft, Lou Lamoriello traded the 9th overall pick to Vancouver in return for Corey Schneider. With that pick, the Canucks drafted Bo Horvat. 10 years later, Lamoriello acquires Horvat from Vancouver to come to the Islanders. Schneider also plays for the Islanders now. Ooh, the Corey Schneider trade tree's got a lot of meat on the bone. End it off. Canucks fans, if you need something to just turn the knife a little bit. Elliot Friedman quoting Bo Horvat, "I thought I was going to be a Canuck for life. Things didn't work out that way." He adds, "It hasn't been an easy year. Definitely looking forward to joining the Islanders. Says no contract discussions yet." I guess all we got to figure out now is, who does Horvat play for at the All-Star game? Does he play for the Canucks, the Islanders, or do they do that weird thing that they did to John Scott and make him wear the NHL logo for no reason? They never did adequately explain that. That was dumb. Remember how dumb that was? That was dumb. So, what do you think? Leave a comment in the comment box down below. Who won this trade? The Vancouver Canucks, the New York Islanders? At first glance, I actually think it's a fairly even trade. The Canucks got a better haul than I think some are thinking. The Islanders have a chance to become better, and maybe they like their chances against a team like Carolina in the first round. I don't know. This does have the potential to go very sideways for the Islanders. But for now, that is it for this one. Thank you very much for watching. Click like if you like this video. Click subscribe to SDPN if you really liked it. Tell all your friends. Sweet baby Lou loves a surprise.